Today, I'm going to tell you a few things about speaking more, but not exactly speaking more, but also how much you have to speak, okay? Because it depends on the parts of the exam, all right? Okay, so let's get started. So, if you're doing part one, okay, so part one, you don't have to speak that much. Okay, if you are familiar with the IELTS exam, okay, in the first part, you have to answer questions, okay? And these questions, they are not very sophisticated questions, okay? They're actually quite simple questions, all right? And so because the questions are quite simple, your answers also have to be quite simple, okay? So it's not a problem if you don't talk that much. But again, if someone tells you, do you like to read in another language? And you say yes, that's not enough, okay? So you should talk a little bit more, but you don't have to talk that much, okay? And remember, maybe it is a good idea to be interrupted by the examiner. It's not a problem at all. Okie dokie, cool. And then part two, the one that people are really worried about. So last week I had a question about part two, okay? So if you want to know more about that, just head to YouTube, okay, and have a look. And I also have a full lesson on part two on YouTube, okay? So you can head there if you're worried about your part two, okay? And so part two, you have to speak as much as you can, okay? So the examiner will tell you, you have 1 to 2 minutes to speak, okay? But you should speak for the full term, all right? So if you stop speaking a bit before the 2 minutes, the examiner might wait a little bit, okay? But it's better to be stopped by the examiner, okay? But one thing to bear in mind is not just talk, okay? As you know, in part two, we have the topics, okay, or the bullet points, okay, that you have to talk about, all right? So it's good to follow them. And sometimes if you miss a point, maybe your speaking wasn't that good, okay? So it's important to follow them and cover all of them, all of the bullet points. So that's a great idea, okay? And so you should talk the full 2 minutes, but it's not just talk blah, 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 blah. Try to follow those bullet points and try to cover them. And if you get to the end, you feel like you have a few more seconds to go, then add something else. And I'll tell you how to do that in a minute. All right, cool. And then part three. So if you want a 6 or more, okay, 6 plus, a higher score than 6, you have to do well in part 3, because part 3 is the part that is more academic, okay? So the examiner is not going to give you a high score if you do not perform well in part 3, okay? And that's the one that you really need to talk, okay? So this one is the one that you have to talk the most, okay? And maybe the examiner will stop you, but it's not that likely, especially if what you're saying makes sense, okay? And you're sticking to the answer and answering the answer, answering the question, not the answer, answering the question. Yeah, so part 3 is the one that you really need to talk, okay? And you go blah, 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 as much as you can. All right, cool. So part 1, you don't have to talk that much. Questions are simple, your answer is simple. Part 2, talk for the full 2 minutes, okay? But just make sure you cover the bullet points. Part 3, talk, okay? And that's the part that will help you get a high score too.